The IFP continued its winning streak against the ANC in the by-elections when it beat the governing party in Ward 13 of the uMhlathuze local municipality. The by-election was necessitated by the resignation of ANC councillor Ndubuhle Ndlovu, who left his job in fear after surviving an assassination attempt. Now, in the northwest, the ANC suffered another loss, this time to the EFF. The Red Berets won Makwasi Hills local municipality's Ward 3 by securing 46.8% of the tally. The ANC did manage, though, a landslide win of its own in Madibeng's Ward 3 in the northwest, obtaining 86% of the votes, while the EFF only managed to get 14%. Let's unpack these numbers now with election analyst Wayne Sussman. Wayne, thank you for making time for us. Let's start by looking at KZN. Who are the big winners? Who are the big losers?
The IFP continue to be big winners, and in KwaZulu-Natal, this is an emphatic victory. When we looked at this round of by-elections, on paper, none of these wards should have been in play. And the fact that the IFP were able to overturn a 40 percentage point margin to capture the seat for the ANC tells us that this was a wild swing and a dramatic result for the IFP in its first by-election since the passing of its founder and leader, Mangosuthu Buthelezi.
What does this mean then for the African National Congress? This battle between the two parties has been going on for some time in KZN.
Well, the ANC have lost a lot of by-elections to the IFP. It hasn't all been one-way traffic. The ANC did win one seat off the IFP. But the general trend, the general trajectory is very positive for the IFP. And I just want to remind the viewers that uMhlathuze is not just a rural backward in northern KwaZulu-Natal. This is the third most populous municipality in KwaZulu-Natal. And if the IFP can overturn results like this, i.e. compared to the local government elections, they are on for a very good showing in the 2024 election. They have a lot of momentum and they'll be buoyed by this result.
Oh, but that's going to be really interesting. In the northwest then, let's look at how the EFF and even the ANC have fared. How are things looking there?
Well, again, the ANC suffered a shock defeat to the EFF in Makwasi Hills. This is near the Tswelelang township near Wolmaranstad, Diamond Fields area, Millie Country area. And here the EFF lost this ward by 30 percentage points in 2021, and they beat the ANC. So again, we're seeing wild swings. These seats on paper should not be competitive, and yet the EFF have upset ANC. And the EFF have now won 4 by-elections off the ANC in the Northwest Province since the 2021 local government elections. And this result will be very good for Julius Malema and the EFF.
What does this tell us about voters' sentiment during this time around? Or is it less about voters' sentiment but more about the work that the political parties are doing in terms of campaigning in these areas? And that's why we're seeing these dramatic losses or dramatic wins.
Great question, Clement. Because turnout was very high in this round of by-elections. I think it was higher in 3 out of the 4 wards. So that shows us that voters were energized to vote. It wasn't just aggrieved voters staying at home and handing the ward to the oppositions. In uMhlathuze and in Makwasi Hills, there was a high turnout of voters. Shows that voters are motivated. They're showing some kind of frustration. And the ANC bore the brunt of that in this round of by-elections. But as you said, it wasn't all doom and gloom for the ANC in the northwest. Because we contrast what happened in Makwasi Hills with Madibeng. Now, Madibeng is the second most populous municipality in the Northwest Province after Rustenburg. That means there are a lot of Northwest voters in Madibeng. And the ANC got over 85% of the vote. It's a significant win. So yes, the ANC will be very upset that they lost Makwasi Hills, but they look at Madibeng, and we've now had 2 recent by-elections in Madibeng, and the ANC's had good returns in both, and that's a good sign for them on the road to 2024.
There was a time when the ANC lost in the Ditsobotla local municipality by-elections. I'm just wondering, what has shifted in Madibeng? Because also the Northwest is one of the provinces that have really been hardest hit by just the failures in governance.
Great. So the good news for the EFF, you just spoke about Ditsobotla, that's the Lichtenburg area, and they won some rural wards there, some wards, hardly any people on farms, When we think of the EFF in the northwest, what do you think about? We think about Rustenburg and Marikana. And Marikana, by the way, is in Madibeng. That's where the EFF made its initial splash in the northwest. And it's winning wards in Makwasi Hills, in Mahikeng, and Ditsabotla. That's showing that it does have a growth trajectory. But where's it struggling? It's struggling in Rustenburg and Madibeng. And that's a contrast for the EFF. It's not doing as well in the provinces where it originally did well in the northwest, but is gaining new ground elsewhere.
Geez, the stakes are high. Let's look at Limpopo now.
This is very, very important because I'm an analyst and pundit who hasn't been as bearish about the ANC. Because I say to viewers and I say to everyone who's worries to listen to me or cares to listen to me, look at the Eastern Cape and look at the Limpopo provinces. The ANC is totally rock solid there. They're hardly losing any support. And there are lots of voters in the Eastern Cape and Limpopo. And I'm not seeing any shift, certainly in the Eastern Cape. The ANC is actually gaining ground there. And in a municipality like Blouberg, and just to tell the viewers where this is, it's the western side of the Soutpansberg Mountains, a rural municipality near Mochwadi, formerly Dendron, north of Polokwane. This should be rock-solid, safe ANC territory. But the ANC lost 20 percentage points to the EFF. The EFF grew by a big percentage there, and the EFF are giving the ANC a fright in a more rural part of Limpopo. And this should worry the ANC, because that changes the calculus for me, and it's back to the drawing board for me and my projections going to 2024.
How does that change your projections?
If we see wild swings like this in rural parts of Limpopo, the ANC really has its back up against the wall when we go to the 2024
And this is
elections.
where the ANC has always had its stronghold, right, where it gets most of its support, in the rural areas.
In the rural areas, particularly in a province like Limpopo, this is north of Polokwane, this is towards the Botswana border. The ANC, I expected them to get at least 80% of the vote here, but they got under 66% of the vote. That's a big slip for the ANC, and they'll have to hope that this was an exception and not the rule going forward in Limpopo.
Are we seeing a similar shift in some of the rural areas in the Eastern Cape?
With the Eastern Cape, it's a total opposite. Voters there are showing their faith in the ANC, are staying with the ANC, and again, that'll be key to 2024. But the ANC cannot just rely on that wall in the Eastern Cape. It needs to make sure that it continues to win the support of other voters in rural parts of this country and, of course, urban areas as well. Okay,
so what we are seeing through the by-elections, what do they mean for next year's elections? For instance, when you look at this victory in Newcastle, does it mean that even if the ANC teams up with another party, it won't be able to topple the IFP?
So that's Richards Bay. I think KwaZulu-Natal has a real scenario where you look at the results. The trends are the IFPs on the march, not just in northern KwaZulu-Natal, but also in more populous areas like eThekwini and Msunduzi, Pietermaritzburg. So I would say that it's very likely that the ANC gets under 50% of the vote, and the IFP will hope to form a coalition with the DA and Action SA. And one thing to remember about KwaZulu-Natal, the rise of the IFP is not just because the ANC is having some troubles. The EFF support in KwaZulu-Natal has actually been collapsing, and I'm someone who chooses my words carefully. They got 1% of the vote here in this uMhlathuze by-election. So the ANC will need coalition partners. And if the EFF's trajectory continues to be so poor, that's a concern for the ANC. And when you contrast that with the IFP, and it's the one part of the country where the DA support is rock solid in KwaZulu-Natal if you compare it to previous elections. So KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng and the Western Cape are going to be our three battleground provinces in 2024.
I remember a time, Wayne, when political parties were not paying too much attention to the by-elections, but things have really changed in recent times. What's your assessment or even your observation of how political parties have invested in campaigning on the ground, even for the by-elections? Because for the longest time, especially the ANC, they've always been sort of comfortable that, you know, we know where our strongholds are and we remain confident there. Have you seen a shift in how parties look at by-elections?
Definitely. And every single party today, I would say, compared to 5-7 years ago, takes by-elections far more seriously than they did back then. So it's investment of resources. It's making sure your battle plan, your election day plan, is battle ready. So these are often dress rehearsals for the big elections. So it's resources, it's sending activists there. and it's making sure that you win hearts and minds. Because remember, there's very little opinion polling in South Africa. So a by-election is a good indicator of how a party's particular strength is at a point of time in a certain part of the country.
Yeah, I mean, I remember President Cyril Ramaphosa going to Ditsobotla to campaign ahead of a by-election. And I suppose that tells you how important the ANC, takes that there. Wayne, thank you for always making sense of these numbers for us.
Thank you.
That's Wayne Sussman there, who is